Good evening. Welcome to the February 26th, 2019 meeting of the Titusville City Council at 5:30. We have a quorum. I'll call the meeting to order. Is there anybody who would like to say an invocation at this point? Not seeing that. Please join me in a moment of silence. Please join me in the pledge to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. First order of business is special recognitions and presentations. First one is Employee of the Month for January 2019.
Yes, sir. We'd like to recognize Mr. Mike Green of the Water Resources Field Operations as Employee of the Month. And I think Andy, Deputy Director here, is going to read the citation. And I really do appreciate the whole team coming out, Jeff, in support. It's really awesome. So appreciate you all doing that. Andy, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Andy Janser, Deputy Director for Water Resources. This is this award nomination I did, and it was sparked by Mike Green over the holidays. Got a temporary promotion to acting superintendent for the holiday vacations and all that. So he was in charge. While he was acting superintendent of the holidays, he dispatched a vacuum tanker truck to provide an emergency incident support for medical facilities, private sewer blockage and overflow into their parking lot. Mr. Green then managed the city's response. Through his decisions and actions, the city was able to contain the overflow impact area to the parking lot and clear the blockage and disinfect the impact area. Mr. Green also took the lead in making sure that the Florida spill reporting requirements were complied with. While private customers are responsible for their own sewer system maintenance and spill response, Mr. Green saw the situation, decided to engage the city in this incident in order to protect public health and avoid an adverse impact on the Indian River Lagoon. This response is an example of responsible decision-making that made a significant impact on avoiding a potentially serious sewage spill incident in Titusville. Mike's action is also consistent with Water Resources' new Stop the Spills campaign to help protect the Indian River Lagoon from pollution impacts. This response is just one example of Mike Green's track record of professionalism and customer service in his field-intensive position as wastewater collection supervisor.
Very good.
Mike, come on up, buddy.
I cheated. I showed you far. Congratulations.
Mike, you did. They're always worried about you. We appreciate what you did. Thank you for all of you. We're going to take pictures. Everybody join in. You both, you get in the middle of it. All right, well, everybody step up a little bit. Let's just go. Right in the center. You get in the center. Let them figure out what they want. There is something in there.
I know. I'm out now.
Okay? There's something in there, it's a surprise. I don't know. Thanks again.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Hey, secret stuff. Yeah. Secret?
And the next order of business, State of the Homeless in North Brevard. I bet I know who's doing that one. You want to introduce him?
Yes, sir. Mr. George Taylor, who's president of National Veterans Homeless Support, will provide an update on the state of homeless in North Brevard. George, welcome.
Honored to be here.
Good evening, sir.
You guys should be proud because you have the least homeless of any city in Brevard County.
We're proud of you for doing
And
that.
We get it done together, Mayor. And
That's
this
true.
gentleman right here, it's partnerships. This gentleman here, all of his officers, we're first responders. We get a phone call, we react. Better to alternative to arrest, putting a criminal record on them, we can intervene. And even the guys that can't walk or too drunk, I have a hideaway camp, and I promise you, by the time they get back, they're sober. So we take them away. But one thing that's interesting, I'm going to read a few of these stats off of the coalition. The Homeless Coalition does a count every year, and they have a 24-hour period to count. In 2014, you had 333 homeless veterans counted. 2018, January, you had 169. Since January of 2018, over 90 of those have been housed. So you have less than 100 veterans in Brevard County that are homeless. On the 2014, you had 1,477 homeless individuals, non-veterans. 2018, it's 734. But since January of 18, 400 plus of those have been housed. It's a 60% reduction. It's partnerships in our county.
Yes, sir.
Cities, county, sheriff, police departments. All of us together are making this impact. And we just did a homeless stand down January 26th. I had 32 chronic homeless veterans. When I used to do a stand down here in Titusville several years ago, I would have 140, 150. So
I remember
all
that.
of us together making that impact. And out of the little less than 100 that are left, we have about 25 that are snowbirds. They appear every year and they disappear after the weather warms up north. And I've got 22 or 23 that say they're veterans, and a couple of them did spend a couple of days in the military. One spent a week in the military. One guy was in there 48 hours. The people that are screaming under the bridge that they're veterans are screaming for resources. They're not veterans. And these stats, all of us together, the Homeless Coalition, the COC, United Way, Volunteers of America, WinVet, all of us together compile these numbers annually. So when people speak before you and they're giving off these numbers, if they're not part of the coalition, if they're not part of the nonprofit coalition, they have no idea where they're getting those stats from. But VOA is trying by June or July to declare Brevard County zero. And we've got about, like I said, we've got 20 some that we're not going to be able to remove. You have 5 in Titusville, and 4 of those are not going to come out. Elizabeth Todd on 405, you see her with her bib overalls. She told me 8 years she was not homeless, she was houseless. Last year I gave her a mobile home in the woods. She's no longer homeless. We even set up a solar system for her electric. So all she has to do is leave there and get water. But trust me, Brevard County should be very proud, and the city of Titusville should be ecstatic at the number of veterans that we have left in our community. With all of you, Chief of Police, and all the deputies and the partners, we will definitely eliminate the homeless in Titusville, other than 3 that won't come out. They're not bothering anybody, they're not panhandling. The ones that are panhandling have severe drug problems up here on the corner, down on 50, they are not veterans. So, and it seems like the more we leave them alone, the more step out. So that's for you guys to call. But I do get phone calls on them. We share, I got tons of MREs, I got tons of water. We share it with the community.
We feed them. There's so many food banks around. There's no reason for anybody to go hungry. But our housing is sufficient. The partners are sufficient. And we're getting it done in our community.
You do a great
So I
job.
just wanted to come here and share with you some of the facts and not some of the stuff that you hear sometimes. Mayor,
We appreciate it.
all of you, thank you very much.
We appreciate it
Chief,
very much.
Appreciate you.
All right, item C is draft vision-based 2040 comprehensive plan.
The
Concurrency-
excitement of the evening now
Yes,
builds as
here it
Brad
is.
approaches to provide a transportation and park-related concurrency level of service standards and the comprehensive plan policies. You guys, this will put you to sleep, so if you guys want to boogie.
You didn't have to say that twice, did you?
Congratulations again, Mike.
Thanks again, man. How you doing?
All right, brother. Proud of you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care, thank you.
Is it one of your football players?
Yeah.
Hey, we have one. From now.
Well, I didn't mean to clear out the room.
They heard you were coming.
I just wanted to give you in our effort to try and continue to educate you about what we did with the comprehensive plan and the project that the fulmination of that we brought to you actually back in December, and you conceptually kind of agreed with our approach and gave us direction to go forward with additional meetings and presentations and public hearings to the public to get them informed about this. We want to continue to educate you on different parts of this plan, and tonight we want to talk about specifically concurrency and level of service and what we had proposed to make and changes as part of that into this new plan. So just to, I'm not going to read this, but basically what concurrency is, and it's a state mandated requirement that all comprehensive plans have. This statement I took from, or description of what concurrency is, I took from the Tallahassee Growth Management Department's website. I thought it was the best description, honestly. But basically what it's saying is that together with all the public services that we provide, that we can't approve new development that would outstrip our ability to provide those services. So water, for example, we have to be able to plan for enough water capacity withdrawal and being able to provide that to our population and to new growth as growth occurs, and we have to plan for that. So an example where this can go wrong is if you have a transportation system, for example, that has designed for a certain capacity of vehicle trips on it, and you decide to approve a development that might actually increase the ability of those roads to accommodate that traffic, that would be a concurrency issue. You couldn't approve that development. So that's the idea behind it. There are 7 concurrency-related facilities that are mandated by state statute. That is water, sewer, stormwater, solid waste, and then schools, parks, and transportation. And then in 2010 or 11, around that time, the legislature actually made schools, parks, and transportation optional. So you don't have to address that in your comprehensive plan. But if you keep it in your comprehensive plan, you still have to abide by it. And so we've had those, and we still have those in our current comprehensive plan, level of service standards to address those 3 facilities. We have an interlocal agreement with the school district for schools, so we continue with that, and we did not propose any changes to that. For parks and transportation, we made some minor adjustments to those level of service standards. So I'm going to start with parks real briefly, and then kind of give you, and then end it off with transportation. Parks level of service standard in our current comprehensive plan requires us to provide enough park acreage in our city relative to population. And the current standard is 8 acres is supposed to be required per 1,000 people. And so there was another metric that was used, or right now it says we have currently 700+ acres of park space in our city. Well, there was another standard that was used a few years ago that actually showed well over 800. We refined that when we looked at our park acreage and kind of refined that number down. It looks like we still exceed our minimum required. So we're at 700 acres. We're required to have 380. And we believe that based on that level of service standard, it's kind of useless. It doesn't require us to provide additional park space. So we have plenty of regional parks, district-wide parks, but we don't have anything that kind of enables us to ask for pocket parks or neighborhood parks. And so we've introduced a new level of service standard with the recommendation of the consultant that we worked with, Kane & Associates, and are suggesting a new policy that would ask us to require a park of some sort within a quarter-mile walking distance. So this would apply to new development. And this will enable us to include new regulation or revised regulations in our code addressing open space and park requirements with new development. So for example, a new subdivision coming in, they would need to provide some kind of park or some kind of amenity as part of the development. That would obviously satisfy this requirement. So that's where this is going. That's where we are with the level of service standards as far as parks. And there I'll try to answer any questions about that particular standard. Otherwise, I'll go on to the next one, which is transportation.
Any questions? Member Jordan?
Thank you, Mayor. Got a little concerned about what you were saying. I understand you're saying a quarter mile from the new development. Of course, as soon as you say that, I say, are you kidding me? Where are you going to find the land for that? But then you said that you could put some kind of amenity in that development. What's the minimum?
Our current standard, we have, well, there's two. I can answer it two ways. We have right now on our current standard zoning districts, let's say you have the property has a single-family zoning district on it. That's our standard one. It currently does not have a required open space or park requirement for a new subdivision if you meet that standard to build a new subdivision in there. However, if you go through our optional process, which is a planned development process for a new subdivision, there would be an open space requirement with that. So, but I'll be frank with you, it's not very well defined. I mean, it asks us to work with the developer to try and provide amenities, but it doesn't get very specific. So I think this policy would help us enable us to come back to you with some specifics with your acceptance, of course.
Okay, because what concerns me is I can put a park bench next to a drainage pond or something, and say, okay, that's the amenity. And it's nothing we can say about it right now, right? So
again, it's not very
it's not clear, so.
prescribed. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
Member Stokel?
Yep. Thanks, Brad. I just want to clarify. So are we saying once this kind of gets adapted, that all development, whether it's PD, anything in that neighborhood category, I guess, would require with their proposal the park, so we can make sure that we keep with kind of what our current level is, with it going down a little bit from that graph?
Sure.
Is that correct?
I would say this, if this is approved, if you accept this, if, let's say, for example, you have a new development coming in and that development happens to be located within a quarter mile of an existing park, they've met that standard. They don't have to provide that amenity as part of that development, unless we have it in our zoning code that would require that anyway.
Okay.
That's a different policy decision. But as far as meeting this level of service standard,
Okay,
that would meet
so no new park space would have to be built, but then I guess as our population goes up, I'm assuming that ratio will get tighter and tighter, where we could potentially, our population would exceed the park requirement. Is that correct?
I think I understand what your question is. You're
Okay.
talking about the graph that I showed?
Yeah, the 8 acres per 1,000, which we're great at right now, but I could see as we're projecting our population going up, 60s, whatnot, that I want to make sure that we plan accordingly. And it sounds like this is what that's doing.
We're proposing to replace that policy, that level of service standard of 8 acres per 1,000 people. So it would not be in existence anymore. Now, you could disagree with that and continue to keep it as a
Okay.
standard, and then add the additional level of service standard that we're recommending in here as well.
So this
we
isn't
have
from the
both.
state? This is our,
This is our policy. We came up with this policy as part of our original drafting of our original comprehensive plan to meet state requirements at that time.
but now since the state requirement's optional? Okay.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, I think I got it now.
I
Okay.
see no other lights.
Okay. Then I'll move on to the transportation level service standard. So if I get the, yeah, here we are. Whoops, gone too far. No, I did not. Excuse me. All right. So there were a couple slides I had in here, I guess they've been eliminated, but I'll just briefly describe what they are. There are some issues with our level of service standards for roadway capacity. Typical standard for roadway capacity is to, or a level of service standards for transportation is typically just to have a standard to say that your roads must be wide enough to be, and designed enough to be able to handle a certain X number of vehicles. So that's the capacity design. And as new development comes on in line, as new growth happens, that will generate additional vehicle trips and be dumped onto those roads. That's the basic concept behind it. The issue with that is that capacity is not mobility emphasis. There's no emphasis related to that. In other words, it doesn't look at alternative transportation modes. It just looks at roadway vehicle trips only. Another issue is that it's focused on a short-term and not on long-term planning. It kind of chases development. And then there's a missing link between transportation infrastructure and land use. And we tried to emphasize that when the previous presentations to you, when we presented to you the original, or our draft comprehensive plan, that we are trying to meld together transportation, the transportation element, and land use element, put them together. They are really not mutually exclusive. They impact each other. You widen a road, you make the property adjacent to it more open for development. You put new development on a piece of property, you generating traffic, you're going to need to widen that road. They are just not separate. So that was the concept with our comprehensive plan. The other thing is there were several changes to the state law since 2005, another big change in 2011. 2005, I believe, is what was called proportionate fair share, was a type of impact fee that was required of all jurisdictions to come up with. And in 2011, that change was eliminated, and it said that local communities can't even require a developer to address a backlog on their roads. In essence, it was making it very difficult for cities to really address transportation capacity issues on their roads, but yet still had them meet concurrency. So what the legislature did by making transportation concurrency optional is now they emphasize what's called multimodal transportation. So it tries to, the state, and I think FDOT is trying to encourage us to look at ways to not look at widening of roads as the first option, but look at it maybe as the last option, that there are other options to roadway improvements to help accommodate additional traffic that might be generated from new development, as opposed to just strictly going forward and adding another lane. That sometimes, and that's not to say that widening is not an appropriate way of dealing with transportation issues. It's just that sometimes access management might be a good way of dealing with that. Might be an additional turn lane in between the two lanes, or access management with certain deceleration lanes, things of that nature, or intersection improvements might help with that flow of traffic, as opposed to just adding another lane. And you can see in the image here, how wide is wide enough. A lot of communities have adopted policies to look at that as a last option. Look at other options first. Let's see. So there, I don't mean to spin this, but there, FDOT would probably disagree with me in putting this up here, but there is a report that was it's been generated by an organization called Smart Growth America for the past 10 years, and they generate this report every so often. And they use, and FDOT and some other places have questioned their methodology, but I think the point is pretty obvious, that when you design your communities in a certain way, that they can be dangerous for pedestrians. The Titusville, Palm Bay, and Melbourne Metropolitan Statistical Area is the third most dangerous MSA in the country for pedestrians. And on number 1 and 2 are two other Florida MSAs, and that's the Orlando area and the Daytona area. And in fact, Florida seems to rank pretty high on this list every time this report comes out. And it has to do, if you think about it, you have wide roads, you have many driveways. It's difficult for a pedestrian to be able to manage walking that kind of built environment. And that's true for a lot of Sunbelt cities, the Southeast U.S., Southwest U.S. Those were cities that were primarily developed after the post-World War II era. Before that era, a lot of the older cities were built they didn't accommodate vehicles as well, or the automobile age was really coming out into some of those cities. So some of those are probably like New York or even Boston, you see that it's easier for pedestrians to walk around. So the point of the report is to say that you need to address or look at your communities in a different way to try and redesign them for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for transit users, and not focus so strictly on the vehicle. So what we try to do, and this is something that's been emphasized in American Planning Association journals and a lot of best practices around the country, including here in the state of Florida and with FDOT, is to shift our emphasis to other modes. And that is to support a mixture of uses on new development and redevelopment, allow for higher density in key areas, connect the nodes with transit, and nodes meaning where transit routes connect with pedestrian routes, bicycle routes, vehicular routes, improve walking conditions throughout the city, and create a network of cycling routes as an alternative or a parallel transportation system to the roadway network, and expand local street connections as redevelopment occurs. So that might include, as you allow for mixed-use development, cross-through streets or bicycle streets or routes through this development so they can get from one block to the other. These are just some images to kind of illustrate the differences between these two approaches. Roadways only on the left, and then you have a more multimodal approach on the right side. So our current comprehensive plan is called the transportation element, has an element called the transportation element, and it focuses just on roadway capacity. We've expanded those policies dramatically in the new comprehensive plan to address all the other modes that are talked about in a multimodal approach as well. So we have policies in there that expand on the concept of complete streets, creating our streets for all modes, for all users, bicycle transportation networks, improved pedestrian facilities, improved transit facilities. And the state statute even talks about multimodal level of service, so that if you wanted to consider replacing your transportation concurrency level of service standard for roadway capacity, you could replace it with something called a multimodal level of service, which is, if you will, you'd have a separate level of service standard for the different modes, and then they would average out for one level of service standard for the whole system. Some communities have done that. That's not something we're recommending that you do. That's something that you can consider. We did not introduce a pedestrian facility level service. You could, though. There's a way to do that. There are practices about it would be a level of service standard that incorporate the width of sidewalks, the location of sidewalks, the facilities around it. And there's a quantifiable number you can use. You could do the same thing with bicycle level of service. The number of bike lanes, the width of the bike lane, the location of the bike lane relative to being on the street or off the street. Those numbers can be factored into a level of service for bicycle facilities. You could do the same thing with transit. You could also do the same thing with street connectivity. And what I mean by that is making sure there's a number of blocks within a certain square mile of your city. I'll show you one example of that. Okay. So another factor in those level of service standards could be the distance between these facilities, between different nodes or between different uses as well. So these numbers here illustrate the willingness of someone to walk from one mode to another, or from one use to another, or someone wanting to ride a bike from one mode to another or one use to another. Would obviously be a longer distance as opposed to someone wanting to walk that. It helps with planning to, where transit stops would go. You'd want to have a transit stop within a quarter mile of a major mixed-use development, because that's a comfortable walking distance for someone willing to go use the transit system. Those are standards that could be considered. What I was mentioning about the block pattern, one level of service standard could be that you'd want to make sure or maintain or encourage a number of blocks within a certain square mile of your city or certain square miles of your city. And what that means is you're coming up with more stringent criteria as opposed that would regulate as far as someone's request to vacate a right-of-way. Because by doing that, you vacate a right-of-way, you get rid of a connection, a potential connection for someone to walk or ride a bike or use a car from one part of the city to another. By maintaining those connections, like what we have right now, this illustration is an example of what we have in our downtown, and especially that area just west of our downtown. That's the original core of the city. It's kind of designed this way with these blocks. After World War II, everything was different. I mean, you didn't see this kind of development pattern happening. But this development pattern is very conducive for creating a city or creating a town that is, or downtown rather, that is conducive for pedestrian facilities, walkability, mixed-use developments. If you decided to apply this kind of standard to other areas in the city, such as on our commercial quarters, that could be in certain predetermined areas. So as mixed-use development occurs on, say, for example, some areas that would be ripe for redevelopment along Cheney, they would need to, we'd want to ask them to incorporate this kind of concept in their development. So those are just some ideas that we considered. What we ultimately did in the draft comprehensive plan was to rename the transportation element a mobility element. We did not change the level of service standard that we currently have for arterial roads. And what I mean by arterial, those are the major roadways, US 1, Garden, Cheney, and collectors, such as Hopkins, that's considered a collector. And then you have the third category, which are local roads that we maintain. We do not have a level service standard for local roads. We did not introduce that. We added new multimodal policies. So we have policies in the new comprehensive plan that address other modes such as transit facilities, bicycle facilities, complete streets. We did add a policy related to block perimeter standards for the downtown. So we looked at our downtown and saw how many blocks there are within a square mile. We saw that there was a good block pattern in our downtown, and especially that area just west of us. And that's where we currently have proposed a new downtown land use designation. We introduced a policy in a comprehensive plan to help maintain that. So if you get requests to vacate right-of-ways, that would need to be consistent with that policy, that we don't reduce the number of blocks in that downtown that would make it reduce that connectivity. We did not add level of service standards specifically for sidewalks, bicycle lanes, or transit, but we could, if that's the direction you want to go to. So again, we in our comprehensive plan, we tried the best as we could to link land use and mobility, transportation facilities and land use. And we integrated into the plan many placemaking policies. We are working currently right now on a mobility or a mobility master plan, and we'll present to you a draft of that with the help of a consultant. Kimberly Horn will be here in May to give you a draft presentation on that with input from the public. It does not currently, it primarily focuses on trails and pedestrian facilities and bicycle facilities, but not transit, not roads, and not golf courses. But we did include a statement inside the new comprehensive plan that addresses golf carts and as an option. So if we decide to do a part 2 multimodal plan, we can look into that. So with that, this was the end of this presentation. We have 3 others we want to give to you in the next few meetings to kind of give you on different parts of this comprehensive plan to kind of educate you more specifically on those issues. So the next one we want to give to you is about our proposed neighborhood land use category, which will help preserve our single-family neighborhoods. We have a natural resource and conservation topic that we want to bring to you in a future meeting, and also another presentation that to rehash what we've already talked to you about the downtown, the gateways, and our proposed design standards. So with that, I'll try and answer any questions you have on this.
Vice Mayor?
Obviously, your slide you thought about not showing was the one with the pedestrian fatalities. And of course, the question we have, we are number 3, but that's Palm Bay, Melbourne, and Titusville. So, and I don't know if you have these numbers, but certainly the question we would probably have up here is, what were the numbers in Titusville? I do read and I see, as a matter of fact, you see an awful lot of issues in the Cocoa Beach area along the beaches. And I'm not saying we don't have them here, but I'm not hearing as much about them up here in Titusville as I do in the south, busier areas and along the beaches. A1A is not so much on the beach, but go ahead.
That's correct. I don't know the numbers offhand. I could certainly look into that. What the study was doing was looking at the entire metropolitan statistical area, which includes Titusville. I would say that our development pattern is similar to the development pattern you see in the south part of the county as well. But I don't believe our numbers are as high as those as Melbourne or and Palm Bay. No.
Yeah, because when you speak and I try to visualize, I think of Cheney Highway or Garden Street versus Wickham. It's very different. And I'm just simply wondering, since it's our plan, what our issues are and what we might need to do to fix them if we have issues at all. So that's all. Thank you.
Member Jordan?
Thank you, sir. First of all, this is going to be additional cost to the city, correct?
For the plan itself or the proposed infrastructure?
For the proposed infrastructure, we would definitely have to spend more money, correct?
To build, what it does is it provides, it depends. I mean, if there are resources through the TPO, through the Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization, for trail planning, for access management enhancement. We just currently, for example, South Street is on their priority list for widening and access management. So I think what the multimodal plan, I think if that's what you're referring to, is really going to look at to see is what is our current network, where are the gaps, and where are the opportunities? And then what are the funding sources? We probably need to look in that later on to see what are the funding sources and how we can
Okay. I was thinking about Hopkins Avenue, and of course, we just repaved that. There is a bike area. The road wasn't widened at all, correct?
That's right.
So we actually reduced the amount of space, and you asked the question, how wide is wide? So I'm just trying to understand how would this play into like a Hopkins as it relates to that. And of course, I'm thinking sidewalks. I don't think, you can't drive a golf cart on a sidewalk, correct? And you aren't supposed to ride a bicycle on a sidewalk, is that correct?
My understanding is the pedestrian always has priority on a sidewalk.
Okay.
But I don't think there's anything that prohibits someone from riding a bicycle on a sidewalk.
Okay. So if we've got a bike path, would one of the remedies be that if we were going to do golf carts, to widen the bike path?
If your local policy is, if the city's policy is to accommodate golf carts, and one of the options is to say on our city-maintained roads like Hopkins, is there an opportunity to widen that bike lane and make it a shared path for golf carts? That's certainly something we could look into. So that would be an option, yeah.
Okay, getting back to Member Diesel's question, I'm just wondering, do we create another hazard if we're now allowing, say, golf carts on Hopkins is wider? You know, people aren't paying attention that much with their cell phones and everything. Do you think we are creating an additional hazard?
Well, I guess the policy would be that the bike lane is dedicated and they have, to the bicyclists, and they have priority. So it definitely would be a conflict. I'd recommend probably looking at other alternatives as opposed to allowing someone in a golf cart to use a bike lane. Local roads can be shared by vehicles and golf carts. That could certainly be an option. Maybe the arterial, like Hopkins, is probably not appropriate, but it depends. I mean, maybe the speed needs to be looked at, and there may be other treatments that could be included on Hopkins to accommodate that.
Member Nelson?
Brad, I'm curious. You said we're not looking at the level of service for sidewalks, bike lanes, and transit. Why? It just seems like it'd be easier to do it all at one time.
We could. I would say we would, that would be a side project, a second project. It could be something that could be an implementation strategy as part of this comprehensive plan, so that you would ask us to work with someone to look into that more in depth, and then we come back to you with a recommendation to amend this comp plan to introduce those kind of policies.
Okay.
It would require significant analysis because, for example, it's difficult to come up with a quantifiable level of service standard for pedestrian facilities, for sidewalks, for example. For a road, you have how many cars can fit on that road. For a sidewalk, it's kind of hard to make that comparison. It's not apples to apples.
Yeah.
So what some urban designers and planners and some engineers will say is that look at sidewalks not as using a level of service standard that's quantifiable like you do for roads, but look at it, how comfortable is it? And just use that as a standard. It's more of a qualitative standard as opposed to a quantitative standard.
So look at it in terms of, is there shade provided? Are there benches?
That's right.
Where you can take a break?
That's right.
Are they level? Blah, blah, blah.
That's right.
Those kind of things.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where we're starting with. That's why we didn't introduce a hard level of service, quantifiable level of service standard in the comp plan yet.
Okay.
So it'd be something we could look at. In fact, it's something we could look at if we did get direction to go forward with urban design standards to implement the comp plan if it's approved. That's something that could be looked at that time.
That would be
Because
good.
when you're coming up with standards for on-site development adjacent to that road, where that building is oriented, how that site is accessed from the road, that's all important, and that does play into pedestrian comfort.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Member Stokel?
Thank you. I have a couple questions. One's back to that slide on the dangerous by design. I noticed on there Tampa had like 900 and the ratio per 100,000 was still higher. Do we know why it was still number 9 and we still ranked higher than them? It's okay if you don't. I don't know if there were other factors there. I just felt like that one should be higher.
It's based on the population.
Okay.
So you see here annual pedestrian fatalities per 100,000 people. And so, yeah, our population in this MSA is much smaller than it is over in the Tampa metro area.
Yeah.
But per 100,000 people, ours is pretty high.
Okay.
That may not, and again, go back to.
I was confused by that whole column because I felt like that should be ranked by the highest, like 3.07 should be at the top, and then it go down from there, but it didn't. So that was just a little confusing to me. But okay. And then my other one was when we say, and I think Jolyn touched on this one, when we say we're not doing this yet, does that mean we just don't necessarily want it in our comp plan because it's too much, but it's still something that we can work on through another?
We don't have good recommendation to you on an appropriate
Okay.
level of service standard for those, yeah. That would something, I think we would have to have outside help.
Okay.
And consultant help to help us determine what is appropriate for our city.
Okay.
Because applying a level of service standard you might find in another city might not be appropriate for Titusville.
Okay. So it would be something down the road, would it eventually go into our comp plan?
With your, yeah, with
Okay.
your direction, of course. Yeah.
Okay. And then I think my last question, I guess, what is it I guess you're looking for from us now? Do you want some direction? Are we going to look at this again? Do you want feedback on these two areas?
we would appreciate any feedback you have or direction, even if it's a
Okay.
collective action from you on
Okay.
this. We gave you the policies. This is just, in here is 14 pages of just the mobility policies, including some other policies that are related to this topic. And so you review them, you have comments,
Okay.
we'd love to hear them. If you support our approach, you already gave us your overall
Right.
blessing on our approach back in December on the whole comp plan, but we just wanted to get back to you to show you the more details.
Specifics. Yeah, and just from looking at it, I feel pretty good about the transportation one. The parks one, I think I want to look at a little bit more just because that's one thing I get a lot. I don't know about you guys, they love our parks. We have so many parks. They like that green space. I just want to make sure just those details a little bit, but you guys have done an awesome job. Like, thank you for making our job a little bit easier. So, thank you.
I see no other lights. We do have a card. Clerk, would you call the card, please?
Stan Johnston.
Thank you. My name is Stan Johnston, 860 Poinsett Avenue, Titusville. I'm addressing you tonight on concurrency and also as a professional engineer. This concurrency issue has to do with sustainability, resilience, our city's future, and that also includes stormwater management. And our stormwater policies right now is that the city refuses to have the floodways under I-95 that lead to the St. Johns River to have them maintained or even have them inspected. Now, please understand that this disagrees with the FDOT design. It disagrees with our stormwater master plan. It disagrees with our freshwater management study. And it is illogical and irrational. And also, please be reminded that it is also, I wrote a affidavit that recorded in public records. The title of the affidavit is Affidavit of Gross Negligence by Some City Officials and City Council on Refusal by the City of Titusville to have ditches and floodways inspected and maintained for over 40 years. And the list of parties in this affidavit has to do with Scott Larice, Sean Stauffer, Walt Johnson, Matthew Behringer, Daniel Diesel, Sarah Stokel, and Jolynn Nelson. I misspelled Jolynn, though. I submitted to you this card, and this card has on it also the four-way test that I would like you to consider in your evaluation of issues. This is an issue that I'm going to ask for any comments, suggestions, recommendations that you may have to me tonight on this matter, because I have sent you a correspondence requesting you to comment on it. That correspondence asked for, and I say you, it doesn't include Robert Jordan. But it has, I'll read it to you. In the email, I requested of these people your logical response for your refusal to have maintained or to even to have inspected floodways, ditches, and so forth, St. Johns River, especially between Fox Lake Road and State Road 50, and your logical response to the above conclusion of the engineering report that I sent to you. Nobody's responded. So this seems to be in accordance with what Mayor Johnson said the other time, is that you don't read them, you don't respond. So I'm ready for any comments, suggestions, recommendations. Thank you.
Are there any other cards, Clerk? Yes, sir. Okay, we need a motion on this item?
No, sir, you're just accepting the presentation?
Right. We don't need a motion for that? Oh, okay. We're accepting. Thank you. Thank you. Well done, sir. Well done. Next item, please.
Yes, sir. Letters of appreciation for that we received during this month. I'd like to read for the record Rose Coney, the Program Specialist at Neighborhood Services, Edie McCall, our Economic Development Director, Sam Osorio, Development Specialist in the Building Department, and Shane Wilson, a firefighter.
Thank you. Any petitions or requests from the public? Anybody like to speak under that item?
Again, my name is Stan Johnston, 860 Poinsett Avenue. I'm speaking in trying to respond to remarks by Mayor Tully and Scott Larice on February the 12th. And that particular incident is that I had no ability to respond to what was said by Mr. Johnson and Mr. Larice. And so I'm here tonight to try to confirm parts of this this issue of city spending $70,000 on an independent engineering organization that disproves everything he has been saying. That's me. So on February the 14th, I sent a formal request for information to our city's attorney, and I requested this information about this particular report, engineering organization, and so forth. And Mr. Broom researched this, and he found nothing to substantiate this $70,000 and a contract for it, $70,000, any naming of the independent engineering organization. So I come to you tonight to ask for who is this engineering independent organization that says that I am let's say it's completely incompetent and inept. And please understand is that that as a registered engineer, it is important for me to correct mistakes that I've made. So I'm asking you tonight to please let me know who this is and what they've said about me or what they've written about me, because Mr. Broom can't find anything.
Mr. Broom, did you want to comment?
You sent 2 requests.
I sent a request to Richard Broom.
Correct.
It's dated February the 14th.
You sent a couple of requests. One was for...
I can retitle it. I can read to you.
Yeah, I know.
Sir,
One,
let him speak, please.
Sorry.
One was with regard to
Take
the
time
statements
off, please.
made by the mayor. And you heard from Brenda Evans, I believe, on that about Geosyntec, and you could come review those documents. And you said you didn't want to see the Geosyntec documents. You sent a second request under Freedom of Information, which you wanted a standing request, and we rectified that.
Yes.
And so you changed that request
Yes.
to ask about 2 particular basins and documents that were sent to FEMA. And that's what I told you. I don't have the record specifically as requested. That was a different request than what you're talking about with Geosyntec.
Okay, well,
So you're confusing that I didn't respond to you that I couldn't substantiate anything about the comments the mayor said. That was the Geosyntec study you said you didn't want to see. I didn't address that. I told you we didn't have specific documents with regard to you wanting basin information submitted to FEMA.
oh, I think I disagree with what you're saying. Is that right here I have the which is February the 14th says our request for information regarding information about $70,000 spent by city as stated by Mayor Johnson and City Manager Larice at council meeting. Brenda reported to me that she had nothing, but I wrote to her. I said, please check with Scott Larice or the mayor. And Scott Larice came up with this Geosyntec issue, which does not match at all what Mayor Johnson and Mr. Larice expressed on February the 12th. I mean, I've talked to these people at Geosyntec. They haven't expressed this issue at all.
No, you said that I could not substantiate that.
Well, I mean,
I didn't
who
talk
is the
to you
city?
about, I did not talk to you about that.
That's true. Okay.
Then don't say that.
All right, then okay. The city, after I've submitted it to you, has expressed to me through Brenda, not the city attorney, that she was unable to find anything. And then I suggested to her to seek Mr. Larice and Mayor
We've offered up the
Johnson.
Geosyntec study several times, Mr. Johnson, and
What?
he knows that. It's available to him to review.
Geosyntec study has got nothing to do with what you said, what was expressed on February the 12th. And I have talked to the head engineer on that. So where you guys stand on this? What's going on? You making up stories?
Your time is up, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak under petitions and requests? If not, I think unless somebody else has any questions on anything, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. The next meeting will open at 6:40, I guess.